Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first panel in the series, Adapting to the Pandemic. My name is Anna K. Rowe, and I'm a doctoral candidate at Ohio University in Athens, Ohio. I'm also a visiting scholar at the Samuel D. Proctor Institute. Today's panel will explore a very important topic, career planning and pivoting in the pandemic. Today's event has been made possible with the support of the Samuel D. Proctor Institute for Leadership, Equity, and Justice at Rutgers University. The Samuel DeWitt Proctor Institute for Leadership, Equity, and Justice is a national research center that focuses on issues of leadership, equity, and justice within the context of higher education. It brings together researchers, practitioners, and community members to work toward the common goals of diversifying leadership, enhancing equity, and fostering justice for all. Now, today, we've really been looking forward to this panel, and we're so pleased that you've taken the time to join us this evening. Today's panel features professionals and scholars with diverse experiences navigating the complex worlds of career development, and more recently, pivoting during the pandemic. I'm very pleased to know and to work with all of our four panelists, and I'm thrilled that they are here today to share their personal experiences and to offer very helpful strategies. At this time, I'd like to invite our four panelists to introduce themselves briefly, starting with Lance Bennett.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Anna Kay, for the invitation to participate on this panel. I'm Lance Bennett. I'm an assistant director of assessment at the University of Texas at Dallas. Essentially, my role focuses on assessing student learning for general education at the university. I'm also a visiting scholar with the Institute as well, and so I'm happy to also know the rest of the panelists and Anna Kay, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much, Lance. Next, Clarissa Sparks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Clarissa Sparks. I am an instructor with the Bank of America Institute of Women's Entrepreneurship, as well as the founder of Sparks & Company, which is a branding and marketing company in Atlanta, Georgia, where I help entrepreneurs and leaders brand, market, and grow their businesses and their personal brand. And I'm also a visiting scholar, so it's good to see all of my fellows, and I'm glad to be a part of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Clarissa. Gabe Bermea.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Gabriel Bermea. I am also a visiting scholar, as we all, I think all are. I'm happy to be with everybody this evening and serve in this capacity tonight. I've been in higher ed for about 13 years now. My current role is to serve as a workforce associate within Excelencia in Education, working on accelerating Latino student success as we help institutions like navigate our pandemic times as we're experiencing now and supporting students of color. I'm happy to be with you all this evening, and I'm looking forward to a wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much, Gabe. And last but by no means least, Mariel Amechi.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Mariel Amici, and I'm also a visiting scholar. I currently have a role as a senior researcher at a policy center at the University of Illinois that was recently launched. It's called the Illinois Workforce Education Research Collaborative, and our mission is to improve education and workforce outcomes among citizens in the state of Illinois. I previously served as a faculty member at Old Dominion University before accepting this role this summer. And so I'm excited to share some insights about my transition into this new role and my vision for my career as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you for all those lovely introductions. We're very happy that you are all here with us this evening. So before we dive into our questions, I wish to remind everyone that this panel is being recorded and will be shared with all registered participants following the event, along with a list of resources. At this time, I'd also like to introduce Michelle Coyne, who is the program coordinator at the Proctor Institute. Michelle will be managing the tech and the Q&A for our event. We encourage you to submit questions using the Q&A box, which we will open 20 minutes before we break for questions. So I will announce that at a specific point, and then we invite you to share your questions, which we will answer, and our panel will be happy to answer your questions during the Q&A section. You may direct your questions to individual panelists or to the entire panel. All right, thank you so much. We've gone through our housekeeping matters, and now we are going to begin with our questions. So questions will be posed to individual panelists and also the entire panel. So the first question for Lance and Clarissa. So I know you both have extensive experience in higher education and also adjacent fields. In what ways has the pandemic shaped or impacted your field or discipline in terms of career prospects or career advancement? Lance, let's begin with you.
So I think so since the pandemic has started, there's been an increase in jobs relative to institutional assessment. I think you can go in higher ed jobs right now and probably see over 200 positions available in this area. So I guess the question is why? Why has there been such an influx? I think it comes down to institutions taking a data-driven approach to making decisions, right? And with assessment, that's one of the things that we do. We use data to help guide the strategic planning process and the decision-making process. And so I think really what happens is that institutions saw that, okay, there may be things that we have to cut. Most institutions did cut some things. And so, what is it that we cut? How do we do it? And using data, we can make those decisions better, right? I don't think it replaces humans though, right? So we have to make data-informed decisions, not data-driven decisions. Data-informed decisions helps us keep the humanity in the process. And so, yeah, so I think that's really what has been sort of the culminating experience in institutional assessment. People are having more robust conversations about moving forward, face-to-face instruction versus hybrid instruction versus solely online instruction. And what does that look like? Can we produce the same quality across the board? And those conversations, we were forced to have those conversations during the pandemic. Some folks may have put it off for a while, but when crisis happens, you kind of don't really have a choice about a lot of things. So, so I think that's really what has transpired as a result of the pandemic.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I like the distinction you made between data-driven versus data-informed and how the pandemic forced us to, to stop delaying having these very important discussions. Thank you so much. Clarissa?
For me, as a CMO or Chief Marketing Officer, I had to re-examine my skills first and look at my interests and values and how can I reposition and pivot myself within the institution and within the for the organization, meaning that we had to realign and again reassess what those brands, and we had to kind of look at the messaging of the institutions to see how did it align with purpose and where we were in the current climate. And doing that, it did cause for a lot of conversation and dialogue between the leadership and just seeing even from the students' perspective or from the target's perspective. So I think overall the pandemic, of course, it was uncertain times and unfortunate. However, it did place us in a situation for growth and to reevaluate how we interacted with our, I always say target audiences, but yeah, with our constituents and with our students and as well as the leadership. So I think just making sure that I knew what I could offer the client in terms of, let's look at the positives in all of the negatives that were being displayed at that time, because there was a lot of information that was being given out and we didn't know what to do in certain situations. So again, it was very important to have conversations associated with the topics so that we could move the institution forward in a positive light.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, I like the point you raised too about we were forced to grow, we were forced to adapt and to really take an audit and assessment of our processes and things that we were doing. So you've really made an excellent point. Thank you so much. And so this is a question for everyone on the panel. Looking back on all your academic experiences and professional milestones, what would you say has been the most valuable advice or experience that has had the most profound impact on your career development? And I'll start with Mariel for this one.
I think I can give a lot of different examples, but I think for me as someone who always aspired to become a faculty member or academic researcher, I think about my experiences as an undergraduate at the University of Illinois. My sophomore year, I was invited to be a part of the McNair Scholars Program. And that program matched me with a faculty of color in the College of Education who's still there. His name is Dr. Christopher Spann. And just having that mentoring experience early on in my academic journey was really transformational because it allowed me to view myself, envision myself as a faculty member one day, or as an academic researcher one day. And so that experience cultivated my interest in educational research, which led me to be a part of a similar program called Summer Research Opportunities Program at Ohio State, and subsequently the Grad Prep Academy at the University of Pennsylvania. And all of those programs were really about cultivating a pipeline of diverse, of racially minoritized scholars who could fill some of the gaps that we see in leadership. And so those experiences were really pivotal for me in terms of shaping my aspirations and allowed me to imagine myself in a position that I had never considered, which was becoming a professor or educational researcher.
Thank you. And it really, what you just shared demonstrate the power of mentorship and the experiences and how transformative that can be. Thank you. Gabe?
Yeah, so I would say this was a tough question to reflect on because it's, there are a lot of milestones that I thought about, but there was really three things that stood out. One of them was I had a supervisor who early in my career, as I was diving into student success work, would always say, if it's not likely to be transformative, why bother? Mm-hmm. And that question would be the question that would push us every time we'd have a conversation about student success, and what that looked like and how it manifests. And that question really stuck with me and laid a very solid foundation for how I approach the work now that I do. It offered an opportunity for me to think through how I would not only question, but respectfully question the conversations that we're having on campus, to push the dialogue in a respectful manner, and then to evolve it, to help the institution evolve in its vision of student success, right? To be more inclusive, to be more supportive, to offer more care and what it meant to have wraparound services, et cetera. But then also on a personal level, he would say that to me as well, well, how is this experience going to help you transform? And the conversations that I had with him were focused less about what I was learning and more about how I was growing. And he would challenge me not to be the best person in the room, but to be the best, to grow to be the best human I could be. Mm. That was a big pivotal shift for me. So with that, I would say that was one of them. The other one was in that process, I also learned how to create not just a network of people. As a self-identified introvert, like I'm not, I don't have like a bazillion friends, like that I'm hanging out with on a daily basis, but for the ones that I do have as, are close, are, I want to invest the relationship, right? I want to build a quality relationship with, I think Michelle and Lance, I think all y'all can attest to that, right? But so with that, it was not necessarily building a network just for the sake of having a professional network, but shifting it to creating a network of care, right? And having individuals who would, who I could talk about not just my career, but my well-being about, and balancing my career ambitions with my well-being. So I would say that was the other thing. And then the third thing that was on my list as a milestone was I had a professor in my graduate work who would tell me, it was a higher ed program, and would say, you have to keep in mind that when you get into the field of higher education, it's a small world, right? Mm-hmm. And not everybody has access to higher education, so therefore it makes it even that much smaller, right? And so it's important to recognize that the student you have in your classroom today may be the one that's hiring you tomorrow, and that stuck with me as well, of thinking, well, that becomes part of your legacy, right? That becomes part of, who you're developing, how you're helping make that change transformative in the classroom every day. So yeah, I would say those would be the three big career advice moments that I've had in my career so far.
Thank you. Thank you so, Gabe. That was powerful. You sound like you had really amazing professors as well, who were not just, concerned about your academic growth, but your personal development and investing in you as a human. And, I really love that, a circle of care, community of care. So that's really wonderful. Thank you. Carissa?
Oh gosh, that was good, Gabe. I think for me, a couple of things kind of stand out with that question is one, always be a lifelong learner. I think that's so important. It doesn't matter what stage you are in your career. You should always be learning and be adaptable, be flexible in your in the process. And I guess my advice would be is to trust the process, even when things don't always seem to be going the way according to plan. Just know that it still is a very important part of the journey. And while you're on the journey, I think it's important to build relationships. That has been very instrumental in my life, is connecting with people who share similar values and issues, so that you can advance to the next level. And you never know who can add value to your life professionally as well as personally. So never overlook anyone. And gosh, early in my career, I think one of the most memorable pieces of advice is give yourself grace in the process. I know that I was very eager in my career and I wanted to learn and learn fast. And my boss or manager at the time, he said, Clarissa, you're going to be great, just not tomorrow. And so I had to, and that sticks with me to this day, to just say, okay, give yourself some grace to learn and to grow and to implement, so that you can make an impact and leave a legacy.
Fantastic. Again, I think that a common thread so far has been supervisors, mentors, advisors, great ones. May we know them, may we become them. So that's really excellent, excellent advice. Thank you so much, Clarissa. Lance, anything you want to add? It's hard to top all that.
I know, right? I know. I agree with everything that everyone mentioned. I'll just share two more things that one of my mentors, has expressed to me and shared with me over the course of time. Number one is to try to get to a place where you can create positive change, right? Get to an institution where you can create some change, right? And I think that, that advice deeply resonates with me, because as someone who does like to challenge status quo. I do it quite a bit, because I just think that there's some things that just we could be improving upon, and that it doesn't have to always be this way. For me, when I hear the answer, well, that's just the way we've always done it, that doesn't sit well with me, right? And so, getting to a place where you can create positive change, it involves some investigating. Like when you're on your job interview, you can dig deep, and when you get to the point of where you can ask questions like, how ready is that boss to move forward and shake things up a little bit? It doesn't necessarily have to be a massive overhaul, but at least a little bit of something. And so I think you can do all that on your end. And the second thing that this mentor shared with me was, just because you're passionate about something doesn't mean that everyone else is passionate about it. And I think the work that we do in higher education, especially those of us who are focused on, access and equality and equity and student success, all of those things, that just because we are doesn't mean that everyone else is. They might be doing the work, they might not be doing it well, but that doesn't mean that they're going to go 100% in that way. And it can be frustrating, right? Because, you're like, this is something that is my sort of bread and butter and things that are core to who I am as a professional and as an individual. But that doesn't mean that that's the same thing for everybody else. And so, taking that into consideration has been really helpful throughout my journey.
Wow, powerful stuff. I don't even need to say anything else after that. That was amazing. Thank you so much, Lance. And all the responses were wonderful. Thank you. All right, so what skills, and this one's for Mariel and Gabe, what skills and professional traits should job seekers be developing as they navigate the current job market or prepare to pivot to new sectors and industries? And I'll start with Mariel.
I think Clarissa touched on this in her last response. The importance of being a lifelong learner is really important, no matter what field or industry you're in. And I'll give a quick example. Just last summer, I challenged myself to move beyond traditional forms of scholarship as a professor, the peer review publications that we all have been taught to do. And I wanted to produce a policy brief. I was invited by a think tank in DC called Third Way to contribute to a series on the COVID-19 response by the government. And I specifically focused my work on youth impacted by foster care systems. And so they invited me to write a policy brief, something that I had never done before. And I challenged myself last summer to produce this brief because I wanted to grow in that area. And I knew that I had the skills, I had enough experience writing peer-reviewed publications that I can transfer those skill sets over to writing a policy brief after reading a few articles on how to write a policy brief. And I think that that experience is really what contributed to my marketability for the current position that I'm in, where our focus is on applied research as opposed to empirical research. And so the importance of being adaptable, the importance of being a lifelong learner, the importance of seeing yourself having transferable skills is really important in terms of being able to navigate this market where you may not necessarily be able to stay in the same type of position that you're currently in.
Excellent. Absolutely. Always being willing to stretch yourself and go outside of your comfort zone. And it did pay off. Thank you. Gabe?
Oh, wow. Like I'm looking at my list and you hit like all the bullet points on my list, man. That's good.
Well, that's great.
I would say like the other thing that I would add though to that is two things. One, or I guess, well, we're kind of reiterating what you said, is learning to take stock, right? So, and I think Clarissa, you hit on this too as well, was, take stock on what you bring, right? Take a moment to center yourself and say, okay, what is it that I bring to this market, and yeah, take stock and reassess that, because that gives you the opportunity to recreate and reinvent, right? And see new possibilities. And I think that's what we've seen come in the pandemic as a result is you have people saying, I saw something on TikTok the other day, somebody talked about the great resignation, right? Because people aren't applying for or have either resigned or quit their jobs because they were like, I've learned something different about myself in the past year, right? So I'm taking this opportunity to reinvent, recreate, and try something different for myself, right? So I think that's an enormous opportunity, right? The other thing I would say is stay engaged. So just because you're not working doesn't mean you shouldn't be working, right? And like, I think an excellent example of that is, I took the opportunity to start doing some research, and like starting, how do you keep staying engaged? Do some panels, right? On Facebook, there were some Facebook groups, for example, that, very much say, I think the audience we have who are, looking for some jobs that are saying, hey, I'm available if you need some help in thinking through your resume or your cover letter, right? And navigating the field of higher education. You can find ways to stay engaged, right? And keep those skills fresh and keeping them going, right? So I think that'd be a biggest one is, stay engaged in the field to keep your skills sharp. And you can say, well, what did you do during this time you were looking for a job? Well, I completed a publication. I submitted a research opportunity. I got a visiting fellow scholarship role within the center. Like those are things that keep you engaged, that show that you've, been doing stuff while you are looking for your next opportunity, right? And then I would say the last thing is take care of yourself. Like, don't get too stressed about it. My mom once told me it's just the job, and it's true, they can easily replace anybody, right? Pretty quickly. So yeah, just take care of yourself, take care of your mental health. That's a big one. And yeah, take care of your physical, do what you can to take care of yourself as you go through this experience.
Yes, thank you, Gabe. And that's so important, the point you raised about continuously doing that audit and seeing what your skills are, seeing what you need to improve on, but also staying connected, staying active in a way that works for you. Thank you. And this leads to the next question that I know Clarissa has a lot of experience in this area. How has the pandemic impacted the way you approach career planning and professional development?
I think in the beginning of the pandemic, doing a part of that, like you said, that audit, and I developed an individual development plan for myself. Didn't know the pandemic was going to last over 3 months, but I did do a short-term goals, and I like to evaluate in shorter terms. I don't look at 10 years, 5 years. I like, what can I do over the next 30 days, 60 days, and 90 days? And that, and when putting myself on that track, gave me an opportunity to celebrate small wins so that I wouldn't get down on myself during the transition process. So I think again, just crafting those good short-term goals, and make sure that they're aligned with their overall long-term, I think that's really good. And that's how it worked for me. And it gave me an opportunity to play around on my career path to reposition myself within the market. And kind of going back to one of the previous questions is staying curious. Doing that research and making sure I being able to identify and ask questions. So I think that's important for as you're transitioning within your career. And also make sure that I did a pulse check on my soft skills. How was I able to relate to people? Am I a great leader? Am I good at problem solving? What skills did I use in my past that I can transfer into the present opportunity? And again, that is what I did. Applied those principles to my individual development plan and celebrated the small wins over 30, 60, 90 days. And the plan has kind of grown out. So do a lot of reevaluation.
Thank you. Thank you. And I really appreciate the point you made about it's good to have long-term goals, but it's also important to have short-term goals, because I do think we are in this pandemic. Sometimes we don't give ourselves opportunities to celebrate our growth and our progress. And I think having those small goals that we can, achieve gives us some hope to keep going, because career planning is tough. We can all agree that the job search process is tough, career planning, interviewing, it's all very exhausting work. But, anything that we can do for our own professional development, any win that we get, I think it will really help to propel us forward. So I really like having these small goals that you're able to achieve, just to give you a sense of hope and joy. Because sometimes it's really hard to find joy in the middle of the pandemic. We don't feel like we have reasons. We think we have to have big successes and not celebrate our small wins. So I appreciate you putting that in perspective.
And Anna Kay, I want to add this as well. When you're celebrating or when you're in the process of searching, reach out to people that you know and know that you're not alone in the process, and other people can identify what's going on with you. Have someone to vent to. You can say, hey, I was there. These are the strategies that I took. I always like to give Lance his props during my process. I was like, Lance, I need a job. I'm looking for this. Can you help me with interviewing skills? And we did mock interviews and went over questions. So again, partner with someone and have an accountability partner helps through the transition as well.
Absolutely. And since we're all bringing up Lance, the inspiration for this panel was a conversation that I had with Lance months ago, and he was giving me some tips. So clearly, Lance, we all have a commission for Lance, but he's been doing some good work. But I really reiterate all of what you said, co-signed everything. In having a network, you're not alone in this. And there is benefit in community. We talk about that all the time. And in this pandemic, more than any other time, we've seen how important community is. So career planning is no different. Excellent. Thank you so much. And our next question. So this one's for Mariel and Lance. So what are some key considerations and critical questions that prospective employees and job seekers should be bringing to the table while job hunting? What kinds of questions should they be bringing up during the interview process to establish whether an organization is right for them? Let's start with Mariel on this one.
Okay. For me, it's really important for me to have a sense of the culture and climate of the environment. And so one of the ways that I try to get at that particular aspect is typically, when there's a panel interview, I try to get each person to respond to the question, and I phrase it in the following manner. If you could choose one adjective to describe the culture or climate of the work environment, what would it be and why? And so that gives each panelist an opportunity to quickly come up with an adjective that describes the climate or culture from their perspective, and give a short response as to why they feel that way. And you'll get a, overall you'll get a sense of, how each person views the work environment from their unique positionality. I think that's really important to ask about. I'm always curious to know what success looks like in the position that I'm going to pursue. And so another question that I typically like to ask, no matter the type of position, is what does success look like in this position, and how do you measure it? And sometimes, it's a question that stumps the interviewer because they haven't really considered, what are the metrics for success. But it gives you kind of a preview of what they're going to be looking for in terms of measuring your performance over that first 6 months, over that first year. And so that's something that I try to keep in my back pocket as a question that I use for any interview situation. And then one last question that I try to ask about is ways in which they're going to support my professional development as a new employee. And I think that's a question that you can ask for any position. How do you support, what are some ways that you cultivate, professional development among current employees? What support do you have for conference travel and participation? What support do you have, for academics, for supporting my research agenda? Are there departmental funds? Are there institution-wide funds? Are there, resources to support me applying for grants that can support my research, and et cetera? And so those are 3 examples of some of the questions that I try to ask going into a new employment situation.
Thank you. Those are great questions because, they really do help you to gauge the temperature, the culture, the climate, and whether the organization is a great fit for you. Because in every interview, it's not just, are you a great fit, but is that organization a great place that you can grow and that you can thrive? Thank you, Moriel. And Lance?
Yeah, I would say there are 2 sets of questions that one can ask themselves. I think one is questions, for yourself, and then second are the questions for the employer or the supervisor. I think for yourself, I think you should just, as you're reading the job description, just ask yourself, what is the growth from here, right? So if I have X position, what can I get beyond that? And I think number 2 is based off the job description, what's in the job description and what's not in it. Are there opportunities for me to sort of plug in extra skills that will help me get to the next position? Right. And so an example of that is in my job description, like strategic planning is not in there. It's not in there at all. It might be in the other duties as assigned, but it's not explicit, right? So
Yeah.
it's not explicit, but what I've tried to do is create that opportunity for myself, right? So that way, as I go up, I see, that's an extra skill set that is really valuable right now that I can add to my, my set of accomplishments that's on the CV. In terms of what to ask the employer or the supervisor, I think it's always good to know, what will the first set of assignments be? You can ask it like, what's something that, what will I be doing the first 90 days on the job? You can phrase it like that. I think that gives you a good indicator of how much work is going to be in your transition. If you're going into a situation where it might not be so good, or you got to go into a situation where you got to clean things up fast, right? And so I think that question will help you in that way. Second is, what is the biggest obstacle that the team / your unit is experiencing? And I think that'll help you as well figure out what is truly going on here, right? Because I think, when it comes to job interviews, employers are going to kind of, they're going to put on a good face for it, right? No one is going to say, no supervisor, hopefully, going to say like, this place is terrible, and you should not go here. You should not go here.
Right.
I hope not. But as you are being interviewed, you also interview them, and so I'm a big fan of that. And lastly, what is the biggest curve that you'll have to get over as you are a new team member, right? So what's the biggest learning curve rather, right? They're all new things that we have to learn on our jobs. And if it's an institution, learning an institutional culture is one of those learning curves. Every institution is different. You could go from one research institution to another, and they have different cultures about themselves. And so I think that those are things that are key. Like when I first started my role back in December, the governance structure at UT Dallas is kind of like something I've never seen before. It's very intense. It's so many layers and so many pieces to it. Yeah, and and when I want to get a proposal through, I have to go through 5 and 6 committees. I've never had to deal with that before, but right. So things like that are going to be key to your success in the role.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you. And I want to also open this up to any of the other 2 panelists if they wanted to add to this question. Are there any pandemic related questions that we should also be bringing up? We're in this new normal, as people like to call it, very controversial term. Some people think nothing about this is normal, and I'm inclined to agree. But what about the pandemic, or what pandemic related questions should we be bringing up during the interview? We could probably hone it in a little bit.
I guess for me, I would definitely ask, well, when do I have to report to the office? How much is remote? Can I continue to work remotely? What is the policies and procedures if we do have an office outbreak? Just making sure that there's some type of clause there. I guess going from the other panelists, I do want to reiterate, never assume. Always ask clarifying questions. You don't want to put yourself in a situation where you just didn't know what the policy and procedure is, or you don't know what your responsibilities or what is that first deliverable. And like Mariel said, what is the metrics of success? How are you going to engage me during this process? And I think it's very critical for the pandemic, really just to know where you kind of fall in place, and making sure that everything is aligned with your career path and with your professional development within the organization. Can you travel? Can you, again, is there funding available now? Where did we cut those resources in order to fulfill the obligations of the need for the pandemic? So I think that's important. But for me, it's all about, can I still work from home?
Exactly. We had a Twitter chat last week, and that was what one of our lead discussants shared, Brittany Seals. Her response was, I always ask, what is the typical workload for this position? How often do you get the opportunity to take on different projects? And you should definitely ask about their work from home plans moving forward. So it really just hits on what you just shared. You need to know. You can't assume. I'm sorry, go ahead, Gabe.
I would also add that in this pandemic, to the point of working from remotely, is how is community being built within your organization? That for me is a really important one, is how are we connecting and building relationships with each other when we are literally across the country, in different time zones, with different responsibilities, with different projects. So not only is how community is being built, but then also asking, what does communication look like in this space now? Right. And that may be just the communication studies background in me, but like it's asking, what does this look like? How are we doing just exclusively email back and forth, where that can, do I need to get some special blue, yellow glasses to read my computer? Like those are levels of thinking about, right? But what does communication look like in this day and age, for this organization? Is it just via phone? Are we messaging each other in GroupMe, or are we doing an online chat, or do we get together in Zoom on a weekly basis or daily basis, right, to check in? Those are important things, not only in building community, but also in strengthening the communication of the organization, to make sure that what communication looks like in this new age, right, in this new world. So those for me are 2 big spaces that I would ask about heavily.
So Gabe, we have to ask, do we have to turn our cameras on? That's my favorite question.
And I mean, I feel like
True.
that is, at some point, that's a question that it's good to know. As you shared, Clarissa, never assume, we're not always camera ready. So that's
Right.
What does dress code look like? I
What
mean,
is
even
it?
that basic kind of question, and I remember asking that in my job interviews, well, what does dress code look like? I'm at home, but I also know I'm working. You got to ask these kinds of questions to get a sense of, how you're going to be productive, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, how do you show up? Absolutely, very important. And as I believe it was Lance or Mariel shared earlier, our professional and personal lives are now blended. So home is work, work is home. So we have to ask these questions. If you're a caregiver, you're a parent, if you're a student, well, you're working full time and you're also a student, these are things that you have to factor, especially if you're a new hire. So asking those questions about what your first 30 days will look like will tell you, do I have the capacity to do this? So all of these questions are very, very telling and will help you to make an informed decision. Gabe?
I was gonna add one more thing because you said about like having kids and stuff like that. One of the questions that I often ask too is, how does working in higher education now, just in any role, I ask, how does your organization support fatherhood? Right, and that's a question that often throws them off because they don't expect traditionally a father to ask that kind of question, but for me that's important, of how does that look like, how do you support me as a father in this role, right? And my wife would ask a similar question of motherhood, right? What does that look like for her, and how do we work that out? Because again, in this space, to your point is, and Lance's point, I think that, we're blending and we're blurring now at this point, right?
Yeah.
I was one of those individuals who like to have my personal life personal and my professional life professional, and I like those two worlds independent of each other. And when I come home, work was done.
Yes.
I wanted to focus on family. So now they're blended, right? And that's some coordination. So what does that look like within the organization? And can you work with me on these spaces? This is what I expect. This is what I need, not necessarily what I want. Does that make sense? And so the terms of renegotiation for both the organization and yourself have reset in a lot of ways.
Oh, absolutely. I love how you said that at the end. And I really appreciate and respect you for asking those questions, because you are showing where your core values lie, your priorities lie, and you are a father and you're a parent, you're a husband, you're a partner, and you are bringing all these things to the table and you want these to be taken into consideration. Excellent. Excellent question. Did anyone else have anything to share before we moved on?
I was going to say, since we talked about it a little bit earlier about mental health, if I could go back to my interview for the job I have now, I would ask about mental health. Like, given the situation we were in, we were 100% remote. What does that look like in terms of, workload, time to take a break, time to take step away? What does that look like? And so I'm fortunate enough to have a really great boss where she values that. Like, for example, I wasn't feeling so well last week. She told me just go home, right? Just go home. And so, stuff like that, is really key because, for some folks, you just got to tough it out and you got to sit there all day. So you just like, let's go home and work from home, right? Since we have the capability to do so now.
Right.
Yes.
And so
I think it's important too, though, Lance, if you're working from home and then finding that balance for time management, because I know in my environment, people are working around the clock, and it's like that expectation is there as well to say, hey, are we checking emails between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. or do we do 8 p.m. or, so again, setting those boundaries so that you can continuously have a strong mental health and take breaks, because going from your bedroom to your office back to your bedroom, your kitchen is now your break room. You just have to separate those places out to say, hey, I got to get out of here. So I often have to leave my home in the evenings because I've been here for the last, 12, 14 hours. And there's no separation. So make sure that you carve out those boundaries. That's a tip for me.
Absolutely. And I've seen this trend of, folks scheduling meetings during lunch hour when pre-COVID, BC, before COVID, we probably would not have done that. So your point is so important, Clarissa and Lance, about, we have to establish those boundaries for our own mental health, for our own sanity, for our own peace of mind, so that we can continue to be effective and really be able to be in a space where we can put our foot down to say, I have a lunch hour, and this meeting, I may just not be able to show up because I need this time to just refresh, to rejuvenate, so that I can continue to do the work. That's so important. Thank you. And then the next question for Gabe and Clarissa: how do you handle rejection? This is a tough one. How do you handle rejection while job hunting, and how do you continue to stay motivated? Gabe or Clarissa, do you want to go first?
Hey, I was just going to say rejection is just a natural part of the process. You're not going to get them all. And you just have to mentally prepare yourself and just say, hey, this is just preparation for the next interview. This is preparation for the next assignment or for the task. And, still evaluate. Maybe you can call back and ask the employer for feedback, which is kind of rare that you'll get someone to provide you for feedback or why you didn't get the job. But again, I'm all about giving yourself grace and just say, hey, it just wasn't a good fit. Or again, we talked about this a little earlier, you're actually interviewing them as well. So are they a good fit? And then once you reevaluate and look at those processes, I think you can handle the rejection or the protection from that opportunity to move forward. So I don't look at anything as wasted time or necessarily rejection. It just wasn't the opportunity for me.
Very well stated. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Gabe?
Absolutely agree. Yeah, just reframing it, right? You've got to reframe, you got to reject rejection in some ways, right?
Yeah.
And I liked how you said that, right? It was a protection, right? An opportunity. And so a couple of things on like that I typically do is I have people, again, kind of getting to that network of care that you set up, that I've got set up for myself. It's, talking it through sometimes, right? Because sometimes it does hurt, right? You get those letters and you really wanted the job, right? But it turned out to not be a good fit,
right.
But you took steps for yourself in thinking and envisioning yourself in that space, right? In that role. And so sometimes you need that opportunity to have a conversation with somebody, right? And talk it through. So tapping into that network of support and care, and saying, hey, just let me talk it through, and, it's okay, right? You can just process that and then, prepare for your next opportunity. The other thing is, I also, Lance hit on it too, like you're interviewing them, right? It's not a one-way space anymore. It's a two-way space, right? It's you're interviewing me, I'm interviewing you, and I'm at the stage in my career where I'm not looking to whether I fit in or not.
Right.
I'm looking for a place where I feel I belong, right? And well, if I didn't fit in, well, I appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation with me, and I'm grateful that you've considered me, because clearly I meet the qualifications because you've interviewed me, right? But I'm okay if this didn't work out, because why would I want to work at a place where I have to fit in, right? Versus a place where I feel like I belong, right? And for me, the distinction there is, if I have to fit in, that means for me that I'm having to conform, or I'm having to give something up, or force something, Whereas if I'm belonging, I'm just bringing all me, right? And I'm here to bring the best me that I can, right? Without, and knowing that I can capitalize on my strengths and my assets and what I bring as a value add to the team, right? So yeah, I would say, yeah, if they said no, well, then it just didn't work out. That's okay, right?
And Gabe, I want to interject quickly, because the statement that you made, that comes with growth and maturity. It takes a long time to kind of get there.
It takes a long time.
But when you can stand, whether you're doing it remotely or in person, and say, hey, this is not a good fit. I don't have to alter who I am as a person to be able to deliver. And so this would be a mutually beneficial relationship this is what I need from you as well.
Exactly.
So again, setting those expectations, creating those boundaries, you know when you leave if it was a good fit or not. Do you fit into the company culture? Do you know that you can actually perform the job that is being asked of you? So I think that's very important to be very self-assured in who you are before going into the interview. And that will also help you with in the form of rejection because you say, you know what, this really wasn't a good fit anyway.
Yeah. And it guides your questions too, of like, so what Lance, you had said earlier about questions you should ask yourself as you're like in the interview space, right? Ask your questions about belonging, not necessarily fit. You know what I mean? Like, can you know, do they see the strengths that I bring to the table, right? I mean, and you'll know in that first interview whether you had a good conversation. Did it feel like a conversation or did it feel like an interview?
Right.
And that for me is a red flag. If it felt like an interview, that's not a space for me, right? Because I appreciate, for me, that feels very bureaucratic, right? And I just don't do strongly in bureaucratic spaces, right? Like I understand the purposes and processes and stuff like that, but if people feel that rigid in their roles, I don't know if there's room for growth because there's not room for conversation.
Right.
So those are levels to think about, right? And so yeah, I'll say that would be like the biggest thing. And you talked about earlier, Clarissa, of like, getting some feedback. Listen, I am down. I will have a conversation. So once I get those letters, and and they're always kind letters, right? Thank you so much for taking the opportunity. We enjoyed our conversation. But they often don't explain why you weren't hired. They just simply say, we've selected another candidate that we feel best suits the role. That's always the phrases that you see in those letters. And that's fine. But I'll pick up the phone, and I'll give a call and I say, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm grateful. I respect the decision. And it's true, I respect the decision. I'm not necessarily interested in exploring why I didn't get the job. But what I am interested in learning about is what do you feel I'd love some feedback on, how I could strengthen my interview skills in roles related similar to this going forward. That shifts the conversation. It's not talking about why I didn't get the job, but talking about, give me some growth opportunity here. Let me learn more about how I can strengthen this going forward for myself, right? And I typically have a couple of questions, right? In the back of my mind of what I thought I could do better at, right? Or be better in that space for. But yeah, being willing to have that conversation. I'm always happy to have that conversation with somebody who calls. And yeah, nobody ever calls though. It's rare. Nobody thinks to pick up the phone. They're just like, they said no, and that's it.
And they move on.
And they move on. And yeah, that's completely, you're right to move on if you choose to do so. But where I felt comfortable, I will say that. Where I felt comfortable, I picked up the phone and I asked.
Yes.
And for me, that was the conversation has never taken place over email. An invitation for a conversation took place over email, but the actual conversation was either done via Zoom or via on the phone. So that was more comfortable, right, to have that conversation.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Gabe. I know Sergio is on here and I know he'd be proud to, just hear how we're talking about the importance of community, because he is our community advocate and a fierce believer in community and giving ourselves grace and bringing our true self to the table. So I really appreciated the way Gabe mentioned, it's about belonging. It's not just about fit, because if you have to give up who you are and conform to this organization, is that somewhere that you can be your true self? Is that somewhere that you can grow? Will you feel stifled and will you resent the decision of taking on this position, which is tricky because we're also in a pandemic. It's a tough choice to make. And I'm sure we've all taken positions that we've had to, conform and change. We have to pay the bills. So it really is easier said than done, but it's very, very important to reflect on our core values and who we are and what's important to us. So I appreciate how candid and real you were with your responses to that question. And I want to announce at this time that the chat box is going to be open. So you are welcome to start leaving your questions there. We're going to wrap up shortly and then open up for Q&A. So this next question is for Mariel and Lance. So we mentioned earlier that our personal and professional lives have changed significantly since the start of the pandemic, and many organizations and institutions were forced to explore new modes of operation. So separating our work lives from our personal lives, we're now working at home. all these things have become extremely challenging, given that we are trying to navigate this new dynamic. So reflecting on all that we've experienced and all that we've seen, what are some of the practices, policies, or norms that have emerged during the pandemic that we should seriously consider keeping in place in the post-pandemic workforce? Moriel, I'll start with you.
I think we already touched on this, but essentially the work from home policy should be something that remains permanent in American culture in general. I think for me, as someone who's been in faculty roles primarily, that's been something that, I've always had the autonomy to work from home, but even more so now that I'm outside of that typical position, faculty position, in more of a, I'm considered more of an academic personnel. So, I'm expected to work from an office. I went into my interview process kind of demanding that, I still have that flexibility post-pandemic to work from home, because I know what works best for me. And I think the pandemic revealed that to me, that, some days, I do still like to go to the office, but other days I would prefer to just wake up and be in my PJs and over my computer and get to work, especially if I'm in the rhythm. And I think, the process of getting ready for the morning, ironing out clothes, showering, prepare lunches and things of that sort, that kind of disrupts your flow, especially if you're in a rhythm. Driving to campus, finding parking, all of those things were things that I didn't have to worry about in terms of working from home. And so it was just a matter of me just focusing on the work. And so I hope from this pandemic, employers really seriously consider giving their employees, no matter what discipline, more flexibility in their work schedules, especially if they are, some cases we have full-time students that are working full-time jobs. How can we be more flexible about meeting students where they are in that regard?
Excellent points. Thank you so much. And don't even get me started on parking. I don't think any of us miss having to figure out parking and the drama that comes with. Thank you so much. Lance?
To go off of what Marielle said, I agree with work from home. I'm big on a hybrid model where you're in the office perhaps 3 days a week, you work from home 2 days a week. I think that model is beneficial because it gives people the opportunity to experience kind of like the best of both worlds, right? I think in particular with those who have kids, Gabe mentioned this earlier. If you have kids, what happened during the pandemic was you were spending a lot of time with your kids, right? Just because everyone was home. Now, and just thinking about just sort of this bigger picture of the impact that it would have on our society now that you would withdraw parents from their kids for a significant amount of time. I think that could be potentially detrimental. And so I think, institutions, need to be more flexible in that way. I think it would make your employees happier. I think it would make society a little bit happier too. But I think also virtual professional development. Now, this is something that emerged not necessarily from institutions themselves, but from professional organizations, right? Virtual professional development, I think, is very important. And the reason for that is, people argue that conferences, well, you're going to miss a face-to-face interaction. I can tell you, I feel like going to conferences, there isn't much true, full networking that always takes place.
Right.
In some ways, yes, right? But I feel like doing it virtually gives you an opportunity to still go to panels, presentations, but still connect offline. Like I went to 5 conferences this year, right?
Wow.
All paid for by the office, thank God, right? But that 5 was because they didn't have to pay for travel, they didn't have to pay for food. It was just all because of the conference fee, right? And so I think keeping that would be really nice for folks. This is kind of like one of those policies that is institution by institution, but I think institutions should think more about promotion and merit bonuses during this period. we all were stressed during this period. And so,
Right.
because we were stressed, and because a lot of folks had to take on more work than necessarily what was in their job description or what was expected, I think institutions should consider, once their fiscal years get ready to start up again, a policy about promotions and merit bonuses.
Excellent. Thank you. Those are really good suggestions, Lance. And I mentioned earlier, we had a Twitter chat last week on this same topic, and I know Dr. Tori Crops is here, and her response to this question was, let's please continue virtual interviews.
Yes.
The increased consideration for more equitable hiring and workspaces must continue. Dr. Karen Kelsky also said virtual interviews in academia. Let's stop making people go to expensive in-person conferences on the slim hope of an interview or a job. Zainaid Mann shared that I see so many women of color saying no more often, and we must keep this going. Let's also normalize work flexibility, parental leave, paid time off without explanation, and that part's important. Self-care, mental health, equal pay, and safety measures for essential workers. So that was just a few of the awesome responses that we got last week, but there's so many more that I know that we don't have time to get into all of them today, but you all shared some really excellent points. Is there anything else before we move on to the next question?
I would say learning to trust your employees. I felt like in this space, we were, your boss isn't there hovering, and you as a supervisor were able to also kind of let go.
Breathe.
Recognizing that, letting go is a form of control.
Yes.
Like you can do that, right? And just, you trust your team, and that I think, and, we thought about our students, you trust your students too. They don't have to be in front of you in the classroom to learn. You can help facilitate growth and learn content from afar. There are ways to do it.
Right.
But yeah, for me, I think that I want to see is an increase in trust.
Very well said. Yeah. Trust the people you've hired to do the work.
Yeah.
And I think if you trust your team, you will be more productive.
Clearly.
And just giving that individual that flexibility to, again, be creative, to come up and incorporate different ideas. And as long as the job is getting done within the respectable time frame, give some leniency, some flexibility there. Again, show that grace. I know, for example, for me, we have a guideline of when our assignments are due, but I noticed with my students, I was like, they're missing this deadline and they're asking for an extension. I was like, so can we just move the dates back? And when we gave them the liberty to kind of when they can turn those assignments in on their terms, it worked. Yeah. And so we saw an increase in students turning in their assignments. So again, that flexibility and using that hybrid method that Lance mentioned, as well as Marielle, it just creates a better work environment. And the culture has definitely changed.
Absolutely. That trust is so important. Thank you. Our final question before we open for Q&A. What resources or advice would you recommend to individuals who are job hunting during this time? Whether it's podcasts or thought leaders, or what are some things that you could share with persons who are exploring new careers at this time? Sure, go ahead, Lance.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, I think one of the biggest things to do is to look at your previous experiences and see how they directly or indirectly align with what you're trying to get to. I think when you look at higher education as a whole, I think there are plenty of folks who have positions that didn't have a sequential path, right? And so there's plenty of reasons for that. But so my thing is, if this is what we're gonna do, I'm gonna use it in the way I want to use it, right? Looking at in my case of assessment, right? Thinking about, assessment is about student learning. I've taught plenty of courses, right? And so thinking about how, my teaching informs student learning outcomes and how we make sure students are meeting certain benchmarks and things like that, all ties into the experience, right? And so it doesn't necessarily have to be a true one-to-one, if you will, for what you're trying to get to. Um, and I think number two, if you're specifically interested in higher education, think about what types of institutions you want to be at, right? And how your role is going to be played out at those types of institutions. So like I mentioned earlier about the governance structure at UTD, UCD is a very large, well, it's a large institution, 28,000 students, right? And so thinking about that, right, the governance structure might not be as complex at a smaller place. Yes. So it's thinking about what sort of layers and headaches you want to put up with on a regular basis. You're going to put up with something, right? You have to deal with something, but it's about what type and how much of that something that you're going to have to deal with on a regular basis.
Exactly. What's your capacity? Very true. Anyone else?
For me, two things that I highly recommend. One, making a list of your strengths so that you can know what value you bring to any opportunity. And then now that, because we are in a digital space and a lot of things are remotely, to do a digital audit on yourself, see how you're showing up in Google searches, on LinkedIn, making sure that your profile is in line with the position that you want, or where you see yourself going. And again, just making sure that you show up online well before you show up on Zoom.
Absolutely. I tell my students that all the time. Google yourself every 3 months. You want to know what they see you before they meet you, because for sure they're going to Google you, and you want to know what your LinkedIn looks like and how you're presented. Excellent advice. Anyone else has anything to share on this one before we open for Q&A? All right. Michelle, do we have any questions at the moment?
Yeah. Here's a question. Can you share some of the common myths you have heard regarding career planning and development?
It's a good one.
I'll dive in real quick. So there's a really, and it's a book, and I forget the author, but it's a good phrase in the sense that what got you there won't get you. What got you here won't get you there, or
won't keep
you there. Something like that, right? And basically recognizing, you got this, what got you to this position isn't necessarily going to keep you in this position, right? There is a level of growth that comes with that, right? A learning curve, as we've all experienced in some way, shape, or form. And I think that sometimes the assumption is, I'm qualified for this job. I got this job, therefore I can do this job. But hey, sometimes you got to, humble yourself a bit, right? And be willing to engage in that opportunity to learn, right? And grow, right? We talked a lot about growth, I think, today. So for me, that I think is a major myth of just learning to humble yourself in the work, right? That's a big one. So.
Excellent advice.
I'd like to add on to that. I think what is the quote? Jack of all trades, master of none. I think that in this space that we're in, I think it's really good to be niche focused and not just a generalist. And that way that you can bring more value as an industry and subject matter expert in your field. I think that's very critical. And so it's a myth that you're supposed to know everything. And I think that if you narrow your focus, that you would definitely differentiate yourself in the market when you're on your search.
Excellent.
And I'll add to some of that. And one of the things I've heard was during a crisis time, that's when you should kind of just fall back because everything's in mayhem and it's in disarray. At least the way I operate. That's the counter opposite to how I operate, right? And how I think about things.
Right.
To me, I think it's a myth that during crisis time that nothing good can be of use to you. You're not going to get anything good from it. I think quite the opposite, because to me, in a crisis, if you can figure out things and put things back in order, by the time that crisis ends, to me, that's your narrative for the next step, for the next job.
Yeah.
That alone, I think will help you tremendously and make you stand out. And so, yeah, you know, they always say like never waste a good crisis, right? And like that's part of why actually that philosophy like led me to applying for jobs during the pandemic, because I was like, oh man, if I can fix things during this time, well then, you know, going up and during times when it's not crisis, well then, hey, right? But I think also to think about it from this perspective, crises will continue to happen.
Yes.
And I think they're also happening more frequently. And so being able to demonstrate those skills is key. And I think to just say like, well, nothing good can come out of a crisis. And for you in this way is a myth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we, you know, they're also in many cases unavoidable. So are you going to use it as an opportunity and to do your part and to shine throughout this? And let's face it, some of these crises are tough situations. We're not saying that you're going to rise like an eagle and, you know, outshine everyone, because crises, you know, it's a tough time. It's a difficult time. Depending on the nature and structure of your organization, it could be even more challenging. But I like your point about reframing and looking at this and knowing that there's an opportunity for you to put your thinking cap on, to show your collaborative skills, to show your listening skills, your willingness to learn, your willingness to volunteer. There are opportunities that will make you stand out during this process that you could then use as a stepping stone. None of us could have anticipated that we would be in the pandemic for so long. Case in point. None of us thought we'd still be here. We thought that at least by last year, we would have been out of this, but here we are. What are we going to do during the interim? How are we going to position ourselves and pivot? What are we going to learn throughout this experience? Michelle, do we have any other questions?
Yes. What's your general outlook for the future of your field, given what you have seen and experienced since the start of the pandemic?
For me, I think the trends that we will see moving forward is incorporating personal stories and purpose branding and marketing to attract students, to attract faculty, and so that, again, building around community. I think we're going to see that a lot more, showcasing the values of the institution and how they relate with the future faculty and students. I think it's going to be big trends. So you're going to see people telling more stories, making it more personable.
I agree. And we need that. Those stories matter. We need that. I think we've been very outcomes oriented, very metrics oriented, and not always valuing the qualitative and the experiences, lived experiences of our students and of not just students, but our employees, because what you just shared is transferable to across many industries. Yes. People matter. We're at the heart of our organization. Yes. And I think sometimes we forget that. It's unfortunate that the pandemic made us remember that we're not machines. And it's unfortunate that it brought us all to this point of having this realization that we can do it all sometimes, but do we want to do it all? We need breaks, we need to recuperate, we need each other, we need community. And it's, sometimes unfortunate circumstances bring out those lessons, which we don't always learn. Sometimes we're forced to learn them. So, excellent.
I would say, definitely, like the pandemic highlighted what I think a lot of communities of color already knew, right? Were some of the systemic inequities, right, that existed. We see it in higher education, like the pandemic highlighted not just the racial inequities, but then highlighted operational things. The digital divide was the big one that came up, right? And so when you look at how institutions distributed their care dollars, a lot of it was centered around technology, Like we had to give out money for hotspots, got to check out laptops, right? So our students would have access to their classroom experience and their learning experiences, right? You highlighted, we got a better understanding of the lives of our students, right? Of what was happening beyond the classroom experience, right? You know, we offered what we could offer them on campus, but then I think the pandemic highlighted, and so hey, this is what our life is outside the classroom, right? Outside, off the campus, right? These are things that we've got to now work through, right? And so I think that those circumstances, I think to Clarissa's point was, you were starting to see the stories of those students come out, right?
Yes.
And because of that, institutions, we hope, and I will admit hope is not a strategy, right? But hope that it reframes what we're doing, right? Or in some cases, what we weren't doing, right? And brings about the necessary changes to make sure that our students are not necessarily college ready, but that our colleges are student ready, right? And I think that's what highlighted this, is that we found out that we weren't as student ready as we had hoped, right? And so I'm hopeful that some of those elements will continue, right? And we'll see. And I think you're seeing that in some of the work, right? You're seeing that in some of the job postings. Is the work of an advisor is now shifting a bit, right? It's no longer just about are you doing okay? Are you registered in the right classes? It's are you doing okay with your coursework?
Yes.
Right? There's a different dimensions of the conversations going on. You know, to Lance's point earlier of, you know, what are we assessing and what are we learning from this, right?
Yes.
And how is it shifting the institutional conversation and dialogue, right? And as visiting scholars, we've talked about this, right? In our conversations of, you know, has that, I think at one point we talked about like being a rubber band. Is it going to bend and break to the point that it's going to require transformation, or is it going to snap right back into place in a few years' time? And I'm hopeful that, you know, the trend is that it's not symbolic, but that it's, you know, actionable, and that we're doing something about it. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm glad that you brought that point up about the racial disparities and the issues that Black and Brown students have brought to our attention, that, you know, they've been saying all these things. In many respects, they've been asking for a lot of these changes. They have been asking for a lot of the things that our institutions know we're, you know, doing for everyone. A lot of these disparities were really, a spotlight was shined on them during the pandemic. And I'm really glad that you brought this point up, because you know, we're now able to see the clear divide. And when it comes to self-advocacy, that's very difficult for, you know, different groups of people. And you know, so the question I want us to probably talk about for our last question is, how do we self-advocate? How do we encourage individuals to self-advocate? What is a possible strategy? Because cultivating networks is important. We all acknowledge that, but let's also acknowledge the challenges that are inherent in doing that. And it's also an intimidating process. When we talk about our different groups of students from different backgrounds and diverse backgrounds, what is your advice for navigating that space as someone with, you know, different lived experiences, different identities? How do we encourage persons who are on the job market to self-advocate? How do we encourage them to cultivate those networks?
I will say that in the job search process, a question that I had never been asked before that was part of a job application is, it said rank the following 10 from importance to least importance, right? And if you've ever, I mean, for those of us who've applied to higher education, that is a question that I have never seen on a job application for an institution, on a faculty position or on a staff position. It's just, you know, give us the information, right? But this particular for-profit company asked this question. And I have to be honest, it was something that I had never sat to think about myself, just sat down, reflected on, and thought through, right? And they asked questions like, you know, the options they gave were like institutional culture, the mission of the company, family and well-being, perks of working with the company, salary, benefits. Like they asked these, some were personal, some were more, you know, mutual, others were more company centric, but it asked us to rank them, right? And you got to put them in order.
Yes.
And it took me like about 2 days, quite honestly. Like when I saw the question, I was like, okay, let me think about this for a second, right? Because again, I'd never been asked. Right. But it was the first time I had an opportunity to take stock in what I value, right, in the company. and transitioning that to higher education, what I value in an institution, right? And so that gave me a sense of not only what my values were for my next step in my career, but also to make sure that, you know, it was okay that if an institution, if an organization or business or an institution said no, and they didn't, these were things that I wasn't comfortable compromising, right?
Yes.
And so I think for me, that was the big thing of like self-advocating in that experience of saying, these were the items that I know that I will not compromise on, right? And making sure that in my conversations, that I'm at least getting a sense of understanding of whether this organization aligns with these values of myself, to foster that belonging, but then also make sure that, you know, if to Clarissa's point earlier of, let me clarify what I'm looking for here, right? And is there an alignment with that here, right? And expressing those in a respectful manner was really, really critical. So yeah, taking stock in your values and making sure that you know where you draw, where your, if a line must be drawn, you know where that is for you.
Very important. Thank you, Gabe. And one final comment from any of our panelists, if you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, I agree with what Gabe said. And I think you can kind of see this playing out in your interview question as well. Like, for example, my current job, my boss asked me a question about, you know, with respect to like gender equity in the office. And that was a question I never got before. One that I believe is highly important, but one that I was never asked before. So it kind of threw me off in terms of like what I prepped and everything like that. You know, because she informed me that, you know, if you get the job, if you accept, you'll be the only guy on the team. And
Okay.
so she asked me, basically, you know, with this issue, you know, how would you handle certain questions or certain issues that come up maybe as you're collaborating with another team on campus, and then there's gender issues there, you know. And so I just took the time to just sort of flip the question because I didn't have a clear-cut answer at the time. So I just asked her, I said, well, you know, has this happened on the team before? You know, what makes you ask that question, other than the fact that this is a national and international issue that we should be discussing, you know, on our campuses, right? And so after her response, I was able to articulate, you know, this is something that is extremely important to me, that that needs to be discussed more. There needs to be more policies and practices in place for gender equity to play out. And so, yeah, so I think, you know, in your responses, I think it can be nerve-wracking because you don't know this person, you don't know what they believe, you don't know how they think necessarily. But I think you can let yourself show, you know, in terms of your values. And I think, to me, that's a form of advocacy as well.
Yes.
Right. You know, knowing what you stand for and knowing what you don't stand for. You know, one of my mentors used to always say, you know who you are before you take any job.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Know who you are, because that's, you know, because there may be times when there's things that happen that counter your values, and so you don't want to be in that type of situation.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And what a brilliant note on which to end. Thank you so much, Lance. And thank you, everyone. As always, we wish we had more time to continue delving into this topic, but unfortunately, we've come to the end of today's panel. So on behalf of the Proctor Institute, I would love to thank all our wonderful panelists for sharing their expertise and just for being so candid in your responses and just sharing how you've been navigating the job market during this pandemic. As we continue to find ways to overcome some of the challenges resulting from these unprecedented times, I really hope that we will all reflect on what was shared today, reflect on the lessons learned, to assess our strengths, to assess our core values, and the kinds of organizations in which we know we can thrive. And above all, to continue to support and empower each other on this journey. We've talked about community, and we're all in this together. We say that sometimes, you know, another controversial term, but we really should embrace the fact that we're going through these experiences together. Special thanks to the hardworking team at the Proctor Institute for their support in the execution of today's panel. Thank you so much, Michelle, for managing the tech for us, and Brandy as well, who's here with us today. Finally, I'd like to thank you all for sticking with us. Thank you for joining us this evening, even if you had to leave. Thank you for being here and for always supporting events put on by the Proctor Institute. Now, if you're interested in learning more about the Institute and if you would like to join us for our upcoming events, we have lots of events scheduled. Please visit our website, and Michelle will share, I know Michelle is going to share that link in the chat. So visit our website, see all the opportunities that are available, and we really do look forward to seeing you all again very soon. And we hope that you'll enjoy the rest of the evening. And once again, thank you so much for participating.